Hi, this is Steve Worona, and you're listening to Campus Public Safety Online from the National Center for Campus Public Safety. Before I introduce today's session, here's a brief orientation to the Adobe Connect interface we're using. Your browser right now is showing the title slide for today's talk. On the left side of your screen, you'll see a box labeled Questions and Comments where you can read and type messages. There's a tab labeled Everyone at the bottom of that box, and that's the tab you'll use for all of your general messages, including questions and comments for our speaker. We'll be breaking for discussion several times during the presentation, so please do not hold your questions to the end. You can also send direct messages to a specific person by hovering your cursor over a name in the attendee list. And one of those names is Technical Help, and that's the place to go if you run into technical problems. We're also monitoring Twitter for your questions and comments. Use hashtag NCCPSwebinar. If you missed part of today's conversation, or if you want to see some or all of it again, this webinar is being recorded and captioned. The link will be available shortly after the webinar on the NCCPS Webinars page. And watch your email for a link to a brief evaluation survey requesting your reactions and comments on today's session. Please take a minute to respond to that survey when the link arrives. We do appreciate your feedback. And now for our presentation. Our topic today is bystander intervention programming for colleges and universities, focusing on best practices and on why campus-wide collaboration is important in establishing a bystander intervention program. Our speaker is Joe Weisensel, a night shift operations lieutenant for the Marquette University Police Department. Jill has served as both a defensive and arrest tactics instructor and a professional communications instructor. She has taught applications of tactical strength and conditioning at Marquette and has more than a decade of experience in the field. In understanding the need for non-escalatory tactics and a more effective and professional way to relate to and manage people, she became an advocate of universally applicable programs such as verbal judo and verbal defense and influence, and integrated several unique communication concepts into the Marquette Takes Action Bystander Intervention Program. Jill has a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and sociology from Carthage College and a master's degree in kinesiology with an emphasis in sports psychology from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. In addition to speaking at multiple Midwest colleges and a number of Milwaukee area events, Jill has most recently presented her work at the 2017 IACLEA Annual Conference and Exposition, the 2016 Virginia Campus Safety and Violence Prevention Forum, and the 2015 International Association of Chiefs of Police Annual Conference and Exposition. Jill Weisensel, welcome to Campus Public Safety Online.
Well, thank you very much, Steve, for the introduction. I'm very excited to be here today and grateful for the opportunity to present on this topic. So thank you to everyone for being here. It's never fun to present alone, and welcome. So today I wanted to start, obviously he just said I've spoken at many national and regional conferences on this topic, but I wanted to start today by explaining to you how I got involved in bystander intervention training. Several years ago I was trained originally as a verbal judo instructor with the late Dr. George Thompson. I was also trained as a verbal defense and influence instructor under the Gary Klugowitz of the Weisensel group in Milwaukee. And I was also trained as a professional communication skills instructor for law enforcement as certified by the State of Wisconsin Law Enforcement Standards Board. So coming from 3 different instructor backgrounds in communications and having the defensive tactics piece, with keeping that in mind, what happened in 2010 is I was asked to sit on a collaborative committee to implement a bystander intervention program related to sexual violence prevention on Marquette's campus. And in 2010, the people who were sitting at that table, I was very blessed that it was collaborative, there was a lot of buy-in, and we had people sitting at the table from the wellness prevention side, we had the alcohol prevention experts there, some faculty staff, we had counseling center people there, and of course our Title IX Clery people, students, and me. So I was very lucky to be on that first committee to make this program. And what I would like to kind of preface this with is that to me, bystander intervention falls closely in line with ethical intervention and some of the override concepts that are often taught in law enforcement. And when I'm asked about who should truly, receive bystander training, I always reply everyone, because it is a life skill, and the sooner we can train it, the younger we can train it, that's going to help build the skill set before students get to our college campuses. And as we all know, those first 6 weeks are trying enough as they are. We want to try to train these skills as young as possible. The other point that I would like to make there is I believe that more police officers and more professionals in public safety should get involved with bystander programming. We are the professional interventionists. We are trained, we have the skill sets needed as pro first responders, and and millions of police contacts and interactions that happen yearly, almost 99% of them end without the use of force. We are able to verbally resolve situations and safely diffuse conflict through conversation. So that's just a takeaway point on that. So today, the first part we're going to do here, I'm going to give you an overview of where we're going to go so you can start getting your questions ready. And we're going to talk a little bit about best practice here before the first break. So today is not going to be about what bystander intervention is or why we need people to intervene. It's specifically going to be about how to safely do what you need to do and when you can most safely do it at that point of impact for interventions, no matter how big or how small. So specifically, today we are going to be looking at, as you can see, the community call for civility, looking at this at the community, the very macro level, and we're going to drill it down to the civilian level, the student level, what you can do when you're actually in that moment. And I would like to also point out that one's ability to intervene is specifically dependent upon their training and experience, specifically related to their perceived ability to intervene, which is going to come with the training that we offer them, and their perceived costs of intervening, which we're going to talk a little bit more later on. So there's quite a bit on this slide, and we're going to be moving back and forth a little bit here. But we're going to talk about best practice in bystander. So the first thing I wanted to point out today is for your college campus, make sure you're using the socio-ecological model, and I actually included that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So in best practice, we're talking about this model is going to suggest that we have to act across multiple levels at the same time. We can't just focus on individual level programming while ignoring the influence that your relationships have or the community level can have on an individual. So if you want to look at it just at the individual level, we need to work to promote those attitudes and beliefs and behaviors that are positive that would work to prevent violence. If we're working to train programming at the relationship level, we need to be looking at those peer groups and how the peer groups influence behaviors in different contexts. If you move to the community level, which here we're going to look at our settings such as our school or our workplace, your neighborhood, how the overall community approaches these topics and these problems, and then all the way to the societal level, those broad-based factors which create the climate that we all operate in. So make sure that when you target your programming, you're looking at each of these elements and how they fit in. The second bullet point on there is encouraging peer-to-peer education, and I'm sure that many campuses, and you're already doing this, we want to make sure that when we're training the programs, we use students. So here we use students. A primary point, make sure that you teach them excellent facilitation skills, making sure that they're able to go out there in front of their peers, which isn't easy to do regardless. But if you give them the training and how to work through those difficult pauses, it'll benefit them in the long run. And as we know, it's very difficult, to get the face time with students, the timing for programming. You work really hard to get every minute in front of them. So when you do, we have to maximize that time with those relatable and very educated peer facilitators. Additionally, make sure you use videos. If the students come up with a video, we use a lot of the what would you do videos. Let the students give you the intel you need. If there's a video or a show that's talking about these topics, put the video clips in. They're always very engaging. If you can use live polling, you can do that right on the spot. There's a couple options for that that can help you with norming on the spot and seeing where your student population is at. And also work to make your scenario training as realistic and engaging as possible. The point here that I want to make is that we have to go beyond online modules or PowerPoints. In order for bystander intervention training to be effective, they actually have to have training, not just education. The third point on there is to make sure you have a piece in there that includes your perspective taking and focusing on the altruistic behavior. As we know, perspective taking is going to be empathy creating, And that's going to lead to that altruistic behavior, the selfless or for others action that we are looking for in a bystander program that will work well for you. The third bullet on there, in any program, we want to make sure that we help students identify the difference between an emergency and a non-emergency situation. And this is something that I get asked a lot. I'm going to do the best I can here over audio to explain this. So people will often say, you know, when does a situation become a police issue? Most likely interventions most often are going to be non-intrusive. They are going to be verbal in nature, and right away when we talk about intervention, student and faculty, their minds go to these big hero situations. And those situations are going to be the more emergency direct or indirect type scenarios. For us, we define an emergency scenario specifically as something that is a threat to life or limb, immediate, or something that's a crime in progress, or a crime that had just occurred or is just about to occur. We would want someone to take immediate, swift, and decisive action in that moment. But really, it's the non-emergency scenarios that we're asking people to be more conscious of and get involved in. And unfortunately, as we all know, those are the most difficult to recognize because of the ambiguity of the situation. I'll give you an example here if you want to break it down into either bullying or microaggressions. Okay, so do most students even recognize what bullying it is or what forms it takes? Or what are microaggressions and what do they sound like? And to me, again, that comes back to communication, right? They're going to be ambiguous and verbal in nature. Could be lies, manipulative communication, the cyberbullying, humiliation, gossiping, teasing, you name it. Any of those brief insults or indignities that happen, those are the things that we're looking to target in an intervention program, specifically because, again, going back, if we look at the cycle of violence, all the way up through sexual assault, battery, assault, it all starts at the very beginning with language, the words we are using and how we interact with people on a day-to-day basis. So that leads us to the persuasion-based and communication strategies, which we're going to be talking about a lot more in depth towards the end of this hour, teaching those students that at the point of impact to use specific phraseology that's going to be non-judgmental or non-accusatory, and also teach them to understand the role that nonverbal communication is going to play in those interactions. The final piece on there that we're going to talk about today is the difference between risk and threat assessment and risk reduction, and how we can talk about those things in the bystander intervention context without victim blaming. Primarily here, we want to work on our training. Again, our program's broad-based. We want to work towards identifying items in different contexts that are going to increase vulnerability. So we want to teach students and staff how to put in place countermeasures and to take action to reduce those vulnerabilities in different contexts. And I'll be giving you plenty of examples here coming up. All right, so quickly, I just wanted to go over our approach here at Marquette. I've been asked that many times. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, and I'm not here today just to promote our specific program. So our approach here is broad-based and collaborative. As I've mentioned, everybody was at the table when we wrote our program, and they are still at the table. One of the things that's great about Marquette is our Division of Student Affairs leadership model. We actually teach a model that addresses leadership at the individual, group, and community level. So bystander programming really seamlessly integrated with our overall student experience. That was great for us trying to implement the programming and getting buy-in. We use a substantial amount of time to train our peer facilitators, even working with them in the fall, in the spring, taking them on retreats, making sure that they have all the knowledge they need before going out there. Then finally, we team that up with our face-to-face training with our students is also targeted with a social media campaign, a social norming campaign that we've designed out of our student assessment data. So we've been very deliberate, and again, we have some very talented people here that I get to work with that are really working off of the data, wanting to make sure we have best practices in place for implementing the social media campaign, the face-to-face training. And again, obviously we all know that the sustainability piece for all institutions is going to be difficult because it's your human resource that we're bringing to the table and the human knowledge that we need to sustain year to year. Our actual acronym is the Marquette Takes Action acronym. That's unique to us. Again, I'm not here to promote just our program, but I wanted to share it with you. The acronym was actually made at a table with several people from across the university at the room and came together with students. It is very easy to remember and can be operationalized in any context. It was very important to us that whatever skills we gave the students, it wasn't just lip service or a sign on the wall that said hate-free zone. We wanted to give them the skills they could use in those moments. So once our students actually go through our training, which is approximately an hour long for this broad-based version, we actually issue them a small credit card size picture like a driver's license. It's going to have the acronym on it, a list of the strategies they can use, a list of engagement phrases that are specific, non-escalatory, and they can use at the point of impact. We even have some of our RAs keep them on their person. If they get stumped in a situation on a call, we've had them pull them out. We talk to them. We get feedback from them to make sure that the program is realistic and usable. So the last point I want to make on this slide is that regardless of the program you are using at your institution, make sure you have the right policies and procedures in place to help maximize your program. So for example here, we have at Marquette a alcohol-related Good Samaritan policy, right? So if an underage student is found intoxicated but they call for a medical reason, right, we're going to protect them from any further police action, right? Now that doesn't mean they may not have to go see conduct because they likely will. So that helps us. We have the Good Samaritan policy in place. Other schools have some form of alcohol amnesty. One of the great things we have in place here is also a complicity policy. And that's in place as a possible student conduct outcome that students could potentially be found complicit in certain situations. In addition to, we can use the bystander intervention training as an actual mandated student conduct outcome. So if we do have a situation where multiple students were found complicit, say complicit at a house party or at maybe an athletic event, we can actually bring the bystander training to them in addition to our first year and second year programming. All right, so I want to talk a minute here about the community call piece for this. So the reason this is important on a macro level is because we want to create and build a community where everyone recognizes that doing nothing is a neutral option, right? So we need to work to make our in-group more inclusive, raise that group expectation about what type of behavior is acceptable, so we can create an environment that is incompatible with violence. We want to create the standard of what the expected behavior is on our campus. We all must live up to it top down. And this is where the concept of ethical intervention is going to come into play. One of the points that I give here as a takeaway point, we want to work to create an environment that is emotionally and physically safer for everyone. A phrase I use is transcend the isms, right? Your racism, sexism, ableism, ageism, heterosexism, classism, all of them at the point of impact, recognizing them when you hear them, and knowing how to verbally deflect it, bring the conversation back to a positive place, and use those as small teaching moments at every point of intervention. My primary point here is that we must clearly define the verbal and behavioral expectations in our environment so that we can better determine that which requires intervention. One of the points here I'm going to take right before break, we're almost there. We understand that there's long-term struggles to get the data and quantify the effectiveness of your program. We need to look for other ways to obtain data. Okay, so this can be found by sharing the wins of successful intervention. You could do that through a social media campaign or perhaps on a website. The other thing we can look at is calls for service. So if you're not with a PD or a public safety entity, work with them. Collaborate with your law enforcement or your public safety department. Look at the calls for service, the types of calls, who is making them, what type of information is coming in. And that way you can actually get an assessment of what types of calls, what are people intervening and calling about, what are they recognizing. You should see an uptick in those types of calls. I know that we absolutely have here. One of the other things you can do is you want to try to integrate as many bystander intervention questions into already existing campus surveys. If you're unable to do surveys in maybe your first year training, we do a survey pre and post, and we also do longitudinal surveys to see if they're retaining it and using it. You can integrate those questions into other surveys, which will help you get more data and help minimize the survey fatigue of the students. So we are almost there. The last point here, the primary goal for your student body, I believe, should be to improve the situational awareness all the way around, whether it's your students or your campus constituents as a whole. Everybody can improve their situational awareness of what's expected and not expected for behavior. And the reason for this is because well before we need bystanders to intervene, we need to do everything we can to help prevent people from becoming victimized by working to reduce vulnerabilities, and furthermore, working to prevent and protect and make sure that people don't become perpetrators. So the same skill set that's used for general personal safety awareness and prevention can be used to make safe interventions. And with that, that's a good spot to take a few questions.
Thanks, Jill. You are listening to Campus Public Safety Online, and our speaker today is Jill Weisensel from Marquette University. And we're talking about bystander intervention in action. If you have comments or questions for Jill, type them into that blank line on the left side of your screen in the area that says questions and comments, and we've got a couple of pauses scheduled to take those questions. Jill, the Take Action program at Marquette is quite detailed. You've got the list, the acronyms, they stand for a bunch of things. Is this the sort of thing that other campuses should think about just adopting on their own, or should these be customized campus by campus?
That's a fantastic question. I know when we started looking at this several years ago, we took a strong look at many other programs that were out there, and there are some fantastic programs. We elected to go our way because of our student population and what we were seeing in our survey data, and we wanted something that was unique to us. We do use the Red Watch Band training for recognizing the signs of acute alcohol intoxication. And bringing in the bystander, we are familiar with. We use that with our sexual violence prevention programming. So I think you really need to look at that on a campus basis, making sure you have the right people at the table to have that discussion for what you want in place, and then taking a hard look at what skills you specifically want them to walk away with.
Colleen Snyder wonders, in order to conduct campus-based BIPs and training, is there a need to be certified?
Could you qualify for me? You say DIPs?
BIPs.
The Red Watch Band training, obviously that's a train-the-trainer model. The bringing the bystander is as well, so you would be trained in those. For our current Take-Action program, which again we use as a broad-based approach to personal safety, we are the primary trainers of that because there is currently no certifying body to do so.
And Colleen clarifies BIPs as bystander intervention programs. I can see why you just type BIP rather than all the rest of it. Let me squeeze one more into this break. How do you increase awareness and motivation to help?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. It's one we get a lot. One of the things is bystanders remain bystanders for several reasons, right? They assume it's not their problem. They assume someone else will do it. Someone else will. It's not. There's all those. There's the diffusion of responsibility, bystander effect, all those phenomenons and theories that we are aware of for why people don't help. To raise awareness, I mean, I'm sure many schools are doing this, and I would love the feedback. You have your tabling, your table tents, your posters, your campaigns, your training. First of all, you're going to raise awareness around any given issue. A lot of bystander programming came out of sexual violence prevention. That is basically where they started. Now you see a lot more schools looking at the broad-based approach, or maybe even integrating it into like a first-year seminar or a life skills program, recognizing that there's a lot more we can get out of bystander training than just focusing on sexual violence prevention. So my short answer to increasing motivation is whatever you have in your programming, work to lower the perceived costs of intervening. People will often not intervene because they feel they don't have the time to do so, or there's no impact and they don't know the person, and help them understand that it's actually the perceived costs of not intervening are much higher. It will dramatically impact maybe your team or your school, that you have to find a way to protect everybody involved, and that's where the community civility piece comes into play.
There's a couple more questions that have come in, but we're going to save them for the next break. Don't worry, we won't lose them. Keep typing those questions. In the meantime, Jill, I'll let you get back to your presentation.
Thank you, Steve. So we're going to be moving on here. The next two sections, we're going to be talking about two specific concepts that are very near and dear to me that we have had a lot of success with our students in understanding this. So the first one is going to be the concept of proxemic management. And how I'd like to phrase this is that I have a question for you to think about. Why do we set ourselves up and physically position ourselves for success in all other aspects of our lives, but not for managing our own safety? Okay, so I'm talking about in athletics or professionally. We make physical adjustments for things that we are threatened by or are not willing to chance. And I could give you a lot of examples here, but I'm going to give you two for the sake of brevity. So first example will be, let's say you're going to go to a movie that you've just been dying to see. Like for me, that would probably be Star Wars coming up in December. You buy your tickets early, right? You make an adjustment. You buy your tickets early. You want to pick the exact seat you want, middle of the row, middle back, so you can see. You make an adjustment for something you want. You don't want to risk. That's a risk we're not willing to take. A second example I'm going to give here is going to be a hitter in a batter's box facing an ace pitcher. So if I'm a hitter and I'm facing a pitcher, they have a wicked curveball. That's a threat to me in my success. So to make the adjustment for that successful at-bat, I'm probably going to move forward in the batter's box, maybe move a little tighter to the plate so that I can reduce the vulnerability of that threat to succeed. So with that in mind, what I'd like to talk about is the concept of proxemic and PROXEMICS comes out of the communications world, communications training. So it's the study of how we communicate in space. If you expand that concept, proxemic management overall is about using position as leverage. Okay, so time and space can be seen as an opportunity and a tactic. You as a student can choose what you do, when and where you can most safely do it. Okay, so we're going to talk about the ways in which this will impact our ability to communicate with people safely at the point of impact. So we want to make sure that when we're training intervention, we want them to intervene only when it's physically safe to do so. I think this is something that students struggle with a lot. We never want to make a situation worse. And I think you can definitely see that, especially in our assessment data, they want to intervene, but they don't always know how, and it's important to give them the tangible skills. So we're going to be talking over the next few slides, and I have several pictures for you, mainly because when I teach this normally, it's live. So doing this via picture and audio presented a challenge, but I'm going to give it a shot here for you. So in working through this slide, we talk about driver's education. The first time I really understood managing space for safety was in my driver's ed class. They said, how many seconds behind the car in front of you should you be and should you maintain so that you don't crash? Right? I think that's something we've all gone through. When I got my motorcycle license, suddenly you're much more vulnerable. You don't have four sides around you. You have to start scanning a lot more. You don't know when the semis are moving. You have to be much more defensive in how you're operating and where you're moving. And that's definitely a change for some people when they're thinking about their space and staying safe within that space. Another example here of proxemics, I'm sure some of you do this as well. You go to the grocery store, it's late at night, you get into your car, you start looking at your phone or checking your texts or putting things away. You shut the door behind you, but you don't lock the door. And suddenly you're now vulnerable to somebody who could potentially have followed you back to your car. I lock my car doors when I am in them all the time because inevitably, as we know it, some student will mistake a squad car as a taxi cab, and if I didn't lock my door, they're going to be in the back seat of my car. So when we talk about managing space, and I have some pictures here for you to work through this point. The first thing in, obviously, is the driving piece. So knowing how to manage your space so that you don't crash. A lot of the accidents that we see have to do with poorly managing our space. If I get out of a vehicle and I step into a puddle because I didn't look, that would be an example of poorly managed proxemics. One of the points that I would like to make here in proxemic management is crime prevention through environmental design. So for my CIVILITY people out there, let's try to bring this back home. We're going to use an example of CIVILITY from back in the medieval times. So we're going to use a castle as the example. So if I'm the king or queen of my kingdom and I build a castle, I'm going to build a castle with tall rock walls, a tower, a moat, and one drawbridge gate. And what they've done is they've used target hardening. They've controlled their access to one point by creating tall walls, having clear sight lines, and if you put up your little medieval kingdom flags, you've now visibly marked your territory. So by them changing how they wanted to build their home, they've created a space that is a proxemic management move to make a safer space. A couple other visual examples here for you. I often talk about this concept as 360 degrees, and that's really not fair because there's actually, if you want to talk, there's 540 degrees if you include around you. You could even go to 720 if you wanted to create a little bubble globe around you. But one of the things when I talk about proxemics on our campus is people fail to see what's directly in front of them. A lot of people fall on the ice because they fail to look ahead at the ice that's right below their feet. And then we have a couple places on campus where we have really bad overhanging, like ice dams. And what baffles me every year is we have these students who will walk down the street and then suddenly they walk by a chunk of ice and they fail to look up, right? So what can we do to manage ourselves in that space to be safer? So that's another example there. And the final set of pictures here for this point is that when we talk to students about managing their space for their safety, we always want to point out the difference between how they feel if they feel safe at home versus how they feel at their college campus. When I say, where do you feel the most safe in your world, 9 times out of 10, a student is going to say their room in their home. And we'll ask them, we'll say, why do you feel the most safe there? And they're going to say, because I get to control the environment, hopefully, depending on your parents, right? You can put posters up on your wall that you enjoy, listen to the music you like. You control. It's the safest place you can be. And then once you get out into your college campus, none of those variables are controlled anymore. And suddenly the world opens up and you become much more vulnerable to those things. So my primary point with the proxemics piece here is that a sound bystander program can really amp up a crime prevention program. So for my crime prevention people out there, and vice versa, if you are in the violence prevention world and you don't have someone with you in the public safety sector, I really think you should team up and talk about this, because giving these skills to the students will help give them a tangible skill set they can use for the rest of their lives. Especially when it comes, I think it was last month's webinar, Dan Pascal was a fantastic webinar, and he talked about how important it was for students to assess those clear sight lines on their campus. But what's ironic is that while you or I may know that we should look for those areas with clear lines, absent of blind corners, the average 18-year-old doesn't know they should be looking for paths with clear lines and appropriate lighting, or options for egress. They're still stuck in that phase of that perceived invulnerability, and that's something that when we program for bystander intervention, we really have to work with them on understanding that they could potentially be vulnerable in those contexts. So in looking at that, I think we are at a good spot for a break.
Okay. Is your question about bystander training for students, is it conducted annually for each class or more often, and is it mandatory?
Our bystander program training, different students of different ages are going to get different doses. So a few years ago, we did test run of the mandatory training for sophomores instead of freshmen. We've definitely had some trouble in trying to train this with the freshmen, which this could open a whole nother hour conversation. They're already getting hit with a lot of different programming on the alcohol prevention side, sexual violence prevention side, plus getting accustomed to the campus. With the sophomores, since they understand the layout of the land better, they understand the campus, a little bit more about what it's like to be a student, we've had a lot more success with their engagement in those trainings at that age. And that would be mandatory. And again, we've worked to make the Bystander program as a student conduct outcome, as a mandatory training. Generally, we don't have to mandate it. What we'll see is, depending on what events, our other programmers are at, we have a lot of tabling, a lot of events from different departments. If the counseling center is out there, or our Title IX, our sexual violence prevention people are out there, we're always promoting our programming. If I'm out doing a self-defense class, I often promote our bystander class, because long before a student's going to ever have to get physical or intervene physically, they can work on some avoidance strategies and recognize some things in that moment.
Right at the beginning, you mentioned that it's not just students who are involved in bystander intervention, your bystander intervention program, but also faculty and staff. But a lot of the examples you've been giving have to do with students. Is the training quite different for those two categories of potential bystanders?
The concepts are not. The content of the pictures and the examples we'll give in the training are very different. So I do a lot of training with youth, like Boys and Girls Clubs, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, your grade school kids. I'm not going to show them, this presentation. In fact, this is the first presentation I've done where there's no video and no live polling. So that's going to look different pictures. They have to be relatable for them to be engaged. With faculty and staff, I'm glad you brought that up, because when you talk about bystander and like the CEPTED principles, if it's my facilities people that are cutting the bushes and the trees down, we're getting to that 2-foot height bush and the 6-foot high sight line on the tree, and we're talking to them, that's part of the CEPTED, that's part of the PROXEMICS piece. Why should they not be a part of your bystander? They are part of your community. They're part of the people who can see the things that are happening that are going wrong, and can give you really good information about what's happening in your campus community. And again, it's working together as a team, top down, to create an environment that is emotionally and physically safer for everyone, and not compatible with violence. We will not tolerate that. Really, there's some ownership and pride that can come into play there. This is Marquette. That's not what we're about. Knock it off, right?
Colleen Snyder asks, how can we become trainers for these programs? And I guess that's a train the trainers issue.
My short answer to that would be to look at what program you want to do. If you are looking at the Red Watch Band, most of these programs are available online. A lot of the resources that we looked at originally several years ago were available online. We took a very hard look at University of Arizona's Step Up program, because it was a leadership life skills model. They have different certification training. If you're talking about our program specifically, you'd have to reach out. My information will be here at the end of the webinar that we could talk more about that.
Tremendous. Well, keep those questions coming, but we'll let you get back to your presentation, Jill.
All right. Thank you, Steve. So this is the home stretch here, everyone, and probably my favorite piece to teach. This is going to be the persuasion communication piece. So the point of impact, how do we teach students to intervene in the moment? What does that look like? What does that sound like? So the first thing is, when I looked at a lot of the other bystander programs, there are a couple programs that do talk about point of impact communication. The one example I just said, the Step Up program talks about the law of delivery and using those like I see, I feel, I will statements, the I statements. Other techniques that we see here for training students, those motivational interviewing techniques can be very helpful. So working to build rapport through empathy, develop some discrepancies when you're talking to them and their positive and negative behavior or decision making. All of those things can be helpful in that point of impact conversation when you're intervening. In our training, unfortunately, I could train persuasion communication probably upwards to 40 hours. And since I have about 10 minutes to do it with you, I am going to give you the best of the best. We work to help them understand the importance of not only their word choice, but the impact that tone and all their nonverbal communication, all their nonverbal messaging will have an impact on that engagement phrase or on their point of impact intervention. And we also work through them on understanding the nuances of being perhaps too passive, assertive, or aggressive in those moments. one of the things, so I'm going to go over a couple of the drills that we talk them through for communications training. We're big on precision of word choice, having them articulate in the moment. We do a word association drill where the facilitator will throw a word out to the group, and I'll do that to you, even though you guys can't respond. The word, it would be, for example, fast. And we'd have the students say back to me the first thing that come to mind. And some people will say, you know, Usain Bolt or Marquette track or on and on and on. And I'll say the first thing that came to my mind was hungry. And we start this dialogue around different words, what they mean to different people, and how changing a word, for example, warm apple pie versus cold apple pie, could impact a communication in your conversation with that person. One of the other drills that we do there, we have them work through the engagement phrases, which I will be showing you here shortly. Understanding the tone and inflection and delivery. You know, pace, pitch, modulation, and inflection go a long way. If I wasn't using any of those skills on this audio call, it would be very, very boring. So that's something that we go over with them, and they love, they laugh. This is actually a pretty engaging piece of our training, and it's usually about 15 to 20 minutes of our hour-long training. One of the other pieces we use to teach communications is I like to use the game's catchphrase and catchphrase turbo. Things, again, that are going to keep them moving and engaged and using words, understanding how people are applying words in different contexts just to get the conversation started around the language we are using. Too often people ignore communication training because everybody can talk, but not everybody can speak. And in the point of impact, it is about the ability to persuade behavior change. My final point there, there's a new game that just came out. If you are looking and interested in this, the game is called What Do You Meme? Like meme, where you can actually match a phrase to a picture and make a meme. Again, I think I've not used that yet, but I think that would be fantastic. So when I teach nonverbal behavior and nonverbal communication, I kind of use an unorthodox method, if you will. I do it for a very specific reason. So first of all, most of what we're communicating in general is nonverbal in nature. And if you don't believe me, you need to ask your dog, because your dog is going to understand your nonverbal mannerisms and your pace, pitch, tone, and inflection probably more than anyone else. The other reason I use pictures of my dog is because people engage more when they look at dogs. I can show pictures all day of nonverbal communication. I can have students act out different emotions. For some reason, they seem to engage mostly with the dog. So I'm going to work through a couple of pictures here just to talk about nonverbal communication and bring it to a very specific point. So this here is Moose. He's 12 pounds. It reflects his personality, not his size. I just snapped a quick picture of him. I don't think anyone would deny that. Here is me yelling the name Moose, as in Moose, right? Changing inflection and tone. I can hear you. I wish I could hear you all laughing out there, because I'm sure you are. He had just torn up a toy all over the house. I was not very happy about it. You can see he lowers his head. His ears go back. There's no doubt in anyone's mind that his nonverbal communication is indicating that he is ashamed and upset. This one here, again, nonverbal communication. I was talking to him about going to the vet. You can see immediately the stress that impacted on his face. Ear goes back, eyes went big. You can see the redness around his eyes. He was not very happy. And on this last one, this was when I said, hey, Moose, you want to go for a walk? How about a treat? Instantly, the smile goes on his face. The ears go back. And so to bring this kind of full circle, first of all, they're going to engage when you use pictures of your dog or something other than people. The second thing is the number one way we persuade dogs to do things generally is by giving them a treat. And when it comes down to persuading non-dogs or people, for example, you have to figure out what their treat is. The phrase we use is what's in it for me, or WIIFM radio station. And if you're going to persuade a student to do something different, we have to figure out what their bait is. What is their hook? What is their dog treat that's going to make them change their behavior in that moment? So to give you a specific example of this, for example, let's say that a teammate, whatever team, makes a bad comment or negative comment about a handicapped person. And a teammate intervenes and says, "You better hope that coach doesn't hear you say that. His daughter is disabled and he will bench you." And in that moment, you understand you're calling out the language and you're putting something in front of the teammate that is of value to that person. So for that person, it may be the playing time. For other students, in those point of impact conversations, it could be about not wanting to risk losing a scholarship, or perhaps, if they get a substantial university infraction, they couldn't go study abroad. Maybe for them, they don't have a lot of money, so they don't want to risk failing out of class. On and on, right? It could be calling the parents. Something at that moment can be used to persuade them into behavior change, and that takes a lot of training. But in the intervention point, training them to persuasion communication strategies will be extremely beneficial to the students. One of the other challenging pieces here in training communication is getting the congruence piece. So making sure that the words, the nonverbals, and your paraverbals, your pace, pitch, tone, is all consistent in the delivery. Any discrepancy in them delivering a phrase without with how they're delivering it could appear disingenuous and lead to a failed intervention. So we want to make sure that they're delivering those things consistently. More often than not, even if I'm sincere, if my body language doesn't show it, no student or faculty or person would react to that positively. So we have a list here that we use of approximately 60 what we call engagement phrases. They've evolved out of a couple of the, like I said, the verbal judo and the verbal defense and influence programs. So using deflectors, how to redirect conversations, things that people can say in that moment to safely intervene. I saw a meme this morning on Twitter, and I think it said, "I heard what you said and it's really not okay. We can't treat people like that." And as you heard how I just said it, I really didn't sell that very well. So it's saying I can deliver that better, right? Hey, I heard what you said and it's really not okay. We can't treat people like that, and at Marquette, that's not what we're about. So having that conversation, how people can use these pieces of communication will be really helpful. I'll give you a few more. I didn't put all 60 on here. You've probably seen these from some other programs as well. And our students have actually helped create a couple of them as well through feedback. So we try to do everything with students working with us and being mindful that they're the ones that need to use it for this program. Again, what comes out for an adult in a workplace setting, say you're trying to intervene against sexual harassment, obviously those engagement phrases are going to look and sound a little different. So on the screen right now, I did put up also some of the deflections and redirections. If people are arguing with you at that point of impact, we want to make sure we don't use the word but, saying I understand, but obviously that's going to dismiss anything that was said before it. So we're very careful to, like on the first one on there, I can appreciate where you're coming from. However, the coach says this, or however, it did offend me, or however. So we work really carefully to make sure we understand that distinction. And the whole purpose of the phraseology of these is to redirect that conversation back towards your outcome goal. And you probably saw in the T.A.K.E.S.A.C.T.I.O.N acronym, and I didn't explain it out loud, but TAKE stands for Threat Assessment Keeps Everybody Safer. That's our first piece. That's the personal safety piece. And in action, we talk about opening dialogue and offering options. So coming up with context in that moment to help persuade them to change their behavior or perhaps not use specific language again. I'll never forget one of my closest colleagues. I made the comment, this was several years ago, out of nowhere I just said, wow, that's so lame. Never thought about it before in my life. Never thought about it being possibly offensive to people who are disabled. It was an ableist comment, and she called me out right away, right in that moment. She's like, really? Really, Jill? You didn't mean that. And my heart sank, and I realized, like, wow, she's right, and I've never used it again in that context. So it can be very, very impactful, especially coming from a peer if it's an intervention. So I'm putting this up. I'm not going to go through these one by one. Again, if you look into any of these programs, these are all easily and readily available online in different ways. These are some that I've seen in looking for how do you give a student specific strategies to use in that moment. Me personally, a trained interventionist, if you will, for me it's always about the communication piece, recognizing, managing my proxemics, doing it safely. And if I haven't tied that point in well enough yet, here's a perfect example. We have a strong homeless population on our campus. The Milwaukee Area Rescue mission is close. So a lot of our students will approach homeless people who are passed out, perhaps in a bus stop. How do you do that safely? Right? So if I don't stand correctly, if I don't manage my proxemics and I come in and maybe I try to shake them on the shoulder and I startle them, and now accidentally a student gets headbutted. So that's a conversation we want to talk about. It's the same thing if you try to wake up a student who was intoxicated. Maybe they're acutely intoxicated and you need to see how they're doing and you're going to call for medical. Again, if you just put your head down by their face and shake them on the shoulder, the likelihood of them getting headbutted on accident is pretty high. So using these strategies, using the communication skills, and understanding the proxemics piece will help make those interventions much more effective. The last takeaway point I wanted to offer today, and I'll just take a couple minutes to do so, we've written this program as a personal safety-based program. In the back of my mind, this has come up for me for like 3 years. Training civilians to be better witnesses. Most interventions are going to be non-emergency situations in an indirect. Maybe you're calling the police or telling an RA, but that is the moment where I need the best information possible. If I'm a dispatcher or if I'm an RA, I want accurate information because as we know, language is everything. So if the information I give to my RA is biased or skewed in any way, or if I don't give a good description of what's happening, their response is going to change. So we are working on developing ways to write more of this into perhaps a Citizens Academy. There are a couple other programs out there that I've seen regionally that talk about this. There's a program called the STOP program. It's called Students Talking It Over with Police out of Milwaukee. Bill Singleton created that program a couple years ago, teaching them how to interact with police and people and how to give a good subject description. And I'm going to give you an example. A couple weeks ago, we had a blue truck crash into Qdoba. And that's what the caller said, a blue truck crashed into Qdoba. And as everyone was trying to respond, it wasn't enough information. And trying to figure out how to articulate that is really important. So I wanted to give at least a minute or two, because civilians are bystanders, right? So if we can teach them how to do this, they can improve their calls to our dispatch centers, improve them to the RAs. It's going to keep everybody safer when more and more accurate information is coming in. So that is my primary takeaway point on training civilians to be better witnesses, and I'm able to take a few final questions if you'd like.
Thanks, Jill, and we do have some. What barriers have you experienced with implementing your program?
Well, initially, I think again, I mentioned this earlier, but back in 2010, 2011, we were at a place like many other institutions where we had to do it. There was no question. We knew we needed to do programming. We were looking for other institutions, what they were doing. And even people now are saying, with the change to Clery, would you stop doing what you're doing? And that answer is no. I mean, we believe that right now best practice is get in front of your students face-to-face, give them skills in not just sexual violence prevention, but in all contexts, right? So your hazing, your acute alcohol, again, addressing microaggressions. Challenges, getting everybody to the table and agreeing on, what the best program is always difficult. Again, as I said before, we have a couple different programs in place here for different reasons, and that's okay. I mean, the Red Watch Band is a fantastic program for acute alcohol, for recognizing that, and the students seem to receive that very well. Other than that, everyone here has been pretty collaborative and has bought in to implementing the training, especially when we were able to pilot the training. I think it was 2013. We piloted training the entire sophomore class, and we went to them. We went to their residence hall, and that was a huge hurdle. And I know there were people behind that piece to make that happen that were not me, but on my team. And we were very grateful for the hard work they put in to make sure that happened.
How would you recommend that campus partners like fraternities and sororities engaged in the bystander intervention conversation?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. Go to them if you want. I firmly believe that every officer, whether you're sworn or non-sworn, is a public information officer. Everybody can be a deputy friendly. We're all part of the community. Go to them. Often when I'm out in the community, if I'm doing a bystander class or a self-defense class or talking on any topic, somebody will come forward to me. And I've had the luxury now of being here, over a decade, and most people will know me. And they'll say, hey, how do I get one of those for my fraternity or my sorority? Send me an email, and we'll set it up. Again, we have, our bystander intervention team, of trained facilitators. If they're not available, we have a couple faculty. Obviously, Sarah Smith is on there listed on my thank you page. Very well-trained facilitator as well. So we encourage them to work and get them to the table for those specialty weeks that are out there. If a group rallies behind, Sexual Violence Prevention Week or Sexual Violence Prevention Month, they will usually seek us out. Again, our information is pretty easily and readily available on the internet too, and on our websites for Marquette. So they'll usually reach out, and if they don't, go to them. And more often than not, they're looking for some fun and engaging programming.
A question about how technology plays into this. Do you see an uptick in the campus police inviting the students and community to text or send pictures via smartphones of incidents on campus to campus police or perhaps to others?
That's a good question. I'm not seeing that uptick here. We've actually, and that could specifically be because we've been working on implementing, what app, like what mobile phone app we're going to use, and kind of switching through. I know a lot of the universities are using the Live Safe app, and I think that'd be a great question to ask perhaps an officer who works in one of those institutions. We're not getting a lot of that, and actually our blue light phone usage is different too. We get a lot of the cell phone to the dispatch center type of information coming in. What we do see every now and then is the cell phones recording incidents, right? So are taking pictures of something that happened, or maybe a roommate dispute. They come home drunk all the time, and the roommate says, "No, I don't," and then the roommate's able to show them a video of what they did the night before and kind of really bring it home for them about what they're doing. So that's really my best answer for that.
Colleen Snyder wonders about getting started. What training is best for us to start our program for students, public safety, student affairs staff, etc., to receive appropriate training to educate our faculty, staff, and students?
I would say if you don't have anything going and you're completely starting from scratch, get a committee together that has somebody from all of those arenas, right? So your student affairs, your public safety, your counseling center, your faculty, you want students, your obviously your prevention people, your wellness people, your Title IX, your clear. Get them to the table and have that conversation. I could say do your homework. I mean, you can always reach out and look for people to come in. If you want someone to come in and consult, reach out to them. Because I can say where we started, I have 2 binders full of over 30 years of research. And any program that was currently out there in 2010 that referenced research, we not only read that research, but we even read what research that referenced. And we went back, and it was almost a PhD size, amount of a bibliography trying to figure out what best to do.
Thanks very much, Jill, and thanks to all of our viewers and questioners from around the Internet. Check the NCCPS webinars page for a link to the captioned recording of today's presentation, as well as a link to our speaker's slides. The brief evaluation survey I mentioned earlier should already be in your mailbox. It will take you no more than 2 minutes to complete. Please do. We read and act on your comments. The National Center for Campus Public Safety is now offering the 2nd year of our extremely popular Trauma-Informed Sexual Assault Investigation and Adjudication Institute at a number of locations from coast to coast. The groundbreaking curriculum was developed in collaboration with nationally recognized subject matter experts and includes modules on 15 topics, from the effects of trauma to interviewing. The schedule for upcoming dates and locations is on your screen. For more details and to register, click the blue link or visit our webpage. Campus Public Safety Online is brought to you by the National Center for Campus Public Safety with support from the University of Vermont Continuing and Distance Education and the U.S. Department of Justice. Special thanks today to Megan O'Neill. This is Steve Worona. See you next time on Campus Public Safety Online.